Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and today we are going to take a look at the Mannlicher 1894 blow-forward automatic pistols. I have a kind of ridiculous selection of them here to take a look at today, so let's get started. In fact, we're going to start with Ferdinand von Mannlicher himself. He was an Austrian engineer. He was born in 1848 and worked into the early 1880s actually as a railway engineer. And definitely a technically minded sort of fellow. Got involved in designing firearms in an attempt to improve the Austro-Hungarian Empire's military proficiency. And in fact, really kind of jumped right in, and his first design kind of took off. In 1885, he designed a self-loading rifle as well as a bolt-action rifle. The bolt-action rifle would end up becoming the 1890 model of straight pull, which then became the 1895 and was adopted en masse by the Austro-Hungarian military. Mannlicher himself ended up working for the Steyr concern, firearms manufacturer, and would end up developing a whole crapload of stuff. Not the least of which, well, in fact, one of his most significant ongoing legacies was the Mannlicher style loading clip, which is ironically not used by these pistols, but it is also known as the en bloc clip, where the clip actually functions as the feed lips of the firearm. And so you take a clip full of cartridges and load the whole thing into the gun, and when it is empty or when it chambers the last round, the empty clip is ejected from the gun, either forcefully out the top, like in an M1 Garand, or through gravity out the bottom, like a Steyr M95 or a Carcano or a bunch of other guns that use that style of clip. Now, when it comes to pistols, Mannlicher had a series of automatic pistols, which by the end of the series became reasonably successful, but never to the level of some of his competitors in early automatic pistols, like, well, primarily Mauser and, of course, Luger. Mannlicher did get an early start, though. These are examples of his first sort of production automatic pistol. These are an 1894 pattern of Mannlicher, and they are a blow-forward design. Pretty unusual. This is a period where a lot of people were starting to patent a lot of different operating mechanisms, and the blow-forward system has some things going for it. Namely, it's got a solid breech block, so there's no way anything can come back and injure the shooter. If you have a blow-back pistol or a slide, neither of which, by the way, had been, well, the slide had not been invented by the time these were being made, but if you have something coming backwards at the shooter, you always have this potential safety hazard of, well, what if it doesn't stop and it flies off the back of the gun and hits the shooter? Especially early in automatic pistol development, that's a serious consideration. That's something people are worried about, whether legitimately or not. So Mannlicher's blow-forward design kind of takes all of that off the table, because the bullet actually drags the barrel forward with it when it fires. As long as you're holding the trigger down, the barrel stays forward. When it goes all the way forward, it ejects the empty case. When you release the trigger, the barrel comes back, chambers another cartridge, and you're ready to shoot again after you cock the hammer again. That's one thing about these, is they were functionally not really any better than a revolver. In fact, functionally, they were in some ways worse than a revolver. They had a 5-round internal magazine, fed actually by Mauser style stripper clip. Kind of had to be a little embarrassing, I would think, for Mannlicher. Anyway, a 5-round magazine. They were chambered for a couple of different cartridges, neither of which were all that potent. And ultimately, these were tested by a number of militaries and rejected by all of them. All right, now there are two primary patterns of these pistols. There's the early version, which is the large frame gun in 7.6 millimeter, and then there's a later version, which is a little bit smaller frame and chambered for a 6.5 millimeter cartridge. And the early guns were made at Steyr in Austria, and I don't know why, but at the end of the first batch of production, they decided to close up shop and take all the tooling and the design and move it to Switzerland. And the remaining, all of the small frame guns, were actually manufactured at SIG in Neuhausen in Switzerland. So why don't we go ahead and take a closer look at a couple of these example guns. There are a number of little tweaks and variances and differences to them that are kind of cool to look at. The size difference between these two models can actually be a little bit deceptive and difficult to spot if you're only looking at one gun rather than seeing them side by side. But the 7.6 caliber here really is just a little bit bigger than the 6.5. If I overlay them, it's really hard to tell. You can feel it in the hand, though. Now, the first production run was actually 10 early experimental trials guns, and that was followed by a run of about 170 of these 7.8 millimeter large frame pistols. Now this particular one is serial number 16. We do also have a second one here, the early 7.8s, which is serial number 31. And there are a few differences. The very early guns, the first 25 or so, some of the features changed. They kind of just evolved a bit. So, for example, on the very early gun here, we have a slightly different style of front sight compared to the standard production run. The early production gun here also has a slightly different style of hammer than the standard production run one. Not anything mechanically different, but they hadn't really standardized some of these parts yet. Even with a production run as small as these, there were even still some fancy guns. This particular example is engraved and inscribed on the rear, the backstrap of the grip. Really pretty fancy engraving on here, pretty fine, very detailed stuff. This actually looks very much like the engraving on factory Bergmann pistols, interestingly. There's a look at the other side. This is serial number 34. And then up here on the top of the barrel, we do have an actual marking. So patent F. von Mannlicher, Ferdinand von Mannlicher, 1894. Since I mentioned it, I should show you the inscription there on the rear strap. Looks like Coronel Roberto Goni, or that might be of a L, something like that. So here's a better view of the large frame and the small frame side by side. You can definitely see the barrel length difference, if nothing else. Now, these large frame guns were in 7.6 millimeter. This is actually a pretty heavy bullet for the caliber. It was fired 112 grain bullet, traveling at right about 790 feet per second for the European folks. That is approximately 7.25 grams at 240 meters per second. Now, at the end of the production run of these large frame guns, they did actually start experimenting with the 6.5 caliber in the big frame. Once they moved to Switzerland, all of the production would be in 6.5 on this smaller frame. The 6.5 actually had the same muzzle velocity, 790 feet per second or 240 meters per second, but it was a smaller diameter bullet and a lighter weight bullet. In the 6.5, you had a 79 grain bullet, that'd be 5.1 grams. So neither of these are particularly potent cartridges. In fact, they're both kind of wimpy cartridges, especially the 6.5. But that's what Mannlicher was working with. There weren't a whole lot of other automatic pistols around at the time. In fact, just about the only other one that was in existence was the Salvatore Dormus at this point. In fact, some of the experimental very first Mannlicher blow forwards apparently were chambered for the rimmed 8mm Salvatore Dormus cartridge. Lastly, before we move on, the large frame gun here is what the US government tested in 1898. They came to the conclusion, as I described earlier, that this really wasn't any better than a revolver. In fact, in some ways it was worse than a revolver, and certainly a lot more costly. So they decided not to adopt it or purchase more of these for further testing. Now, when we get to the 6.5 guns, a few things change. Unlike the earlier ones, these are actually marked with their location of manufacture, Fabrique d'Armes Neuhausen. That, of course, is in Switzerland. You could, at this point, also get yourself a complete cased, very nice, Mannlicher 1894. Comes with a bunch of accessories. You get a cleaning rod, you get a screwdriver, some oil, and space for 2 stripper clips, each loaded. So this is the 6.5mm cartridge. You can see a 79 grain bullet is actually pretty big for 6.5mm, and that led to a very long bullet. Nothing marked on the top straps here because they instead had, and this one doesn't have it, so there's some variance in all of these. This is serial number 14 of the small frame guns. They were serialized in an independent series, and they did not actually put the SIG marking on this one. If you wanted, you could get a shoulder stock lug on one of the 6.5 guns. It's kind of interesting. There are a number of these stock lug equipped pistols known, including, of course, these two. But as far as I know, nobody actually has a shoulder stock for them. So what happened to those is a bit of a mystery. Who knows? Certainly very plausible that they simply wore out and got thrown away. There certainly aren't all that many of these pistols made in the first place, and at this point they're going on, what, 120 years old, so not maybe surprising that a small number of stocks wouldn't have survived. Now let's take a look at how these actually function. So first off, this is effectively our bolt handle, although it is on the barrel. The barrel blows forward. That is how the gun cycles. You can see it coming out the front of the frame there. And if I hold the trigger down, the barrel will lock open. You can see that the follower is nicely beveled there, so when the barrel comes back, when I release the trigger, it can pick up a cartridge nice and smoothly, chamber it, and then it's ready to fire in double action mode. Or I can cock the hammer manually and fire single action. So you can see how this is, in practical usability terms, very much like a revolver. You're going to hold the trigger down, leave it open, load it via stripper clip right there, release the trigger to load the first round, and then you're going to either fire it double action or manually cock it, just like a revolver. There is no manual safety on this. Mannlicher figured, given its similarity to a revolver, just like a revolver doesn't need a safety, neither did these. All right, we've got another one here, one of the other stock lug gun, and we're going to go ahead and take it apart. So we're going to start by taking the one screw out of the grip. The left grip panel will come out attached to the left side plate, and also with the internal magazine, all as one piece. Take out the screw. I'll just kind of gently wiggle this up. Come on. You can do it. There we go. And then this comes out. That has the magazine all built into it. Take a quick look at that. Follower, spring, all those bits. Interestingly, one of the patent drawings that Mannlicher had actually showed a double stack 9-round internal magazine. That was never actually produced. All they made were these 5-rounders. We'll put that aside. Now we've got all the lock work inside, and we are going to start by using this little yoke tool that is stored in the grip. This is actually used to take tension off of the mainspring. So I'm going to go ahead and start to cock the hammer and drop that right in there. And now I have removed the tension. So now I can take out a couple of these bits, and then I can take off the barrel. First up, I want to take out this pin. These guns are actually pretty simple internally because lockwork-wise, there's not a whole lot to them. They're pretty similar to double-action revolvers. Now I can take out the trigger, which is going to have a couple extra little bits on the back. Now, it is important, if you have one of these or if you run across one of them, it looks, you'll notice perhaps, the barrel shroud is going to unthread, and it looks like this is some lever that you just kind of pry down, and it's spring-loaded, and then you can unthread the barrel jacket. That is not the case. You actually need to take out these pieces, and then this piece actually slides all the way out of the gun. It does lock the barrel shroud onto the frame. If you just try and pry this down, you'll break stuff, so don't do that. Now that we have that locking piece out, we can unscrew the barrel shroud. There is a recoil spring under here, and it's longer than you might expect, so hold on to this. There we go. There's our barrel shroud and front sight. Just a hollow piece there. And now we can pull off the barrel and extractor. So the extractor on a blow-forward firearm works a bit differently than every other gun you're used to ever seeing in your life. What this actually does, it doesn't grab the rim and then pull it backward to extract. Instead, it grabs the rim and holds it in place while the barrel moves away from it. So this cutout right there holds the rim of the cartridge, and the extractor actually stays in place while the barrel cycles forward. That pulls the cartridge out of the chamber and allows it to be ejected by the next cartridge coming up from below in the magazine. Or if this is the last round in the gun, then the magazine follower itself pops up and kicks the empty case out. And then lastly, we are left with an empty Mannlicher 1894 blow-forward frame. If I wiggle this too much, pieces are going to fall out of it, which I don't really want. But you can see this is pretty much a double-action revolver inside. Now, reassembly is going to be just the reverse. You do want to make sure that this, actually you can see right here, this hook has come out of the mainspring. You want to make sure that that's connected before you release the yoke and return spring tension, or else it will be a mess. So there we go. We want it like that. And then, once we're done, get all the bits back inside, release the spring tension, take the yoke off, and reassemble the gun. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. These are one of only really 3 blow-forward designs that are out there, and it is exceptionally cool and unusual to be able to look at this many of them all in one place. So hopefully you learned something new about 1894 Mannlicher blow-forward pistols. If not, my congratulations to you. There's not very much information out there on these. So if you do enjoy this sort of content, please do consider checking out my Patreon account. Supporters there really go a long way towards helping me travel around and dig up pistols like these out of collections to show to you guys. So, thanks for watching.